Welcome to a lecture on the principal agent problem by John Fanning. Hopefully you've watched the video on transaction cost economics, and building on that we can see perhaps how this starts to create and to underpin what is called the principal agent problem. This is a problem related to the fact that the agent, someone who's hired to do a job for someone else, for example, we can see quite clearly a theatrical agent representing actors or a football agent representing footballers, negotiates on behalf of them to try and get them the best deal from their employers. It is a clear example of someone whose job is to represent a principal, but we have to note that the agent has their own interests, and so they do not always act in the principal's interests. And we can extend this into all jobs, especially into senior managers and CEOs. The root of this view of CEOs in modern economics is the fact that, as we've seen in transaction costs, the firm is a nexus of contracts, not actually a single profit maximizing entity at all, as it is portrayed in classical economics. You have, in fact, a number of people who are operating as factors of production and have their own role, and they are constantly renegotiating the contracts under which they work. These contracts may be formal or they may be informal. They may be, for instance, they may be a written contract to a supplier, or they may be a contract of employment. But even within a company, you'll find that people's contract of employment are supplemented by something we call the psychological contract, which is unwritten. So these firm contracts can exist within a firm. They also exist across the boundaries of the firm, between those inside the firm and those outside the firm, for instance, such as suppliers. And it may be these days that actually the boundaries of the firm are pretty fluid, and they can be very complex relationships, such as part ownerships or cross share ownership or things like that. So it's not as simple as straightforward as it may have been in the past. So we have these very complicated actual structures and this constant renegotiation of contracts because everybody has their own needs and aims. And under classical models, we're saying that both parties to the contract are seeking to maximize their own utility. And this does not necessarily combine to maximize the company's utility. And as the company is not a single entity, it is based on each individual trying to maximize their own individually. Jensen and Meckling identified that of the key agency problems, the major one that affects everybody is the separation of management and finance. This goes right back to the work of Chandler, but who said, oh yes, we are going to separate finance, and we're going to have the owners, the controllers, and the people who run the firm being different. Chandler saw no problem with this, but Jensen and Meckling said, actually, this is the fundamental problem in modern management. Well, let's start at the end, if you like. Let's actually have a look at what's wrong with this way of looking at the world. One of the first things we'd say about this is it's actually a very one-dimensional view of humans. We don't all spend our lives sitting down and rubbing our hands together, planning how we can do things better just for ourselves. We work alongside other people all the time. We do things for other people. Within transaction cost economics video, we have been shown that actually people offering gifts and working together, even they utilize transaction cost economics to a certain point, but don't do so in a completely selfish manner. People may not actually always seem to be maximizing their own utility. Sometimes they work for the good of others. And there can be reasons about this that do actually affect how it's maximizing utility. For instance, there are reputational issues that may be important to people. It's not always about trying to be in the short term and spend all our time trying to make as much money as possible. If you do that, you get a bad reputation. People don't want to work with you. People worry about their reputation for future work and worry about what other people think about them. They look to develop a career. So people often want to work, in this case, the long term. It's not a case of the fact we want to move on from a new job every 6 months or every year. If we think about managerial business economics and game theory, then you are playing the same game over and over in employment, and defecting is less attractive. Agency theory suggests that everybody always defects and acts in their own interests. If you're never going to see anyone again, if it's a one-off contract, it's easy to default, easy to defect, and easy to drop the people you're working with. If you know you're going to have to work, so you're going to have to spend a lot of time with people, then obviously it becomes more difficult to what you might turn over then. And this also leads to the creation of what we call a market for managers. Managers get their large salaries because they are based on their experience, based on their achievements elsewhere. As long as this is true, the reality, of course, that managers will worry about their place in the market. They'll worry about their future earnings. They'll worry about their future employability. And therefore, actually, will make an effort to do a good job just to make an effort to accrue the largest short-term profit as possible. That's not just the only thing they'll be doing. There's also the fact the market itself sends signals if a manager is not doing things correctly for a company or is not running a company properly. We will see in other videos that I do about Milton Friedman's argument about shareholder value, and it's quite simply the argument is that the price of shares will fall and the profits of companies will also fall. Shareholders can monitor a company without actually actively monitoring it, simply by saying this company isn't doing as well as it should be, where we're going to sell our shares in it. People start to think there's something wrong with this management, and therefore the company will become undervalued. These market signals will become a real issue, and then people react to them. So look for the video on shareholder value and the work of Friedman, which will address this directly, but be aware that it is always there, and these market signals can override agency theory. So this, of course, brings out the argument, the final compelling argument, that agency theory is not itself a theory at all, but is an ideology. An ideology is something that we actually work on and believe in and push forward, rather than that. And of course, and this is possibly one that is actually self-fulfilling. Let's be clear. There are many examples of the principal-agent problem across all employee-employer relationships and across all contractual relationships. Perhaps the most important is where stockholders and shareholders have suffered losses due to the top management of their organisation looking after their own interests and not looking properly after the interests of the company, or even actually losing money because the executives are distracted to look after somebody else's interests, not even necessarily their own. And that's what the argument is put forward by Friedman over corporate governance as shareholder value. But it shows these well-paid executives have not run their corporations in the interests of their shareholders. The fact that we can show examples of this, however, does not prove agency theorists are fully correct. Agency theorists claim, from the evidence of the fact it has happened, that it is the high point of corporate governance literature, that all developments in corporate governance are simply about closing the agency gap, coping with the problem. Closing the gap between principal and agent cures all these governance issues. But this is simply reductionism, by saying simply we have to do these things sometimes, therefore it's all been caused by agency theory, and therefore agency theory is correct. The theory is not just claiming that we sometimes have to do this, though. The theory claims that everybody behaves like this all the time because there is underlying iron law of economics, transaction costs, the fact that people's self-rational pursuit of utility. But they cannot prove this simply by producing a few examples of this kind of behaviour. This does not prove the underlying claim. We all know some people behave badly. Agency theory claims that this is not the issue. The issue is that everybody behaves badly because the economics tells us they will do. So how is this relevant to our grand vision of governance and responsible business and management? We think of a framework for us to think about the relationship of ownership and control, and can we say this relationship is fundamental to responsible business management? Corporate governance can be said to be how we arrange and organise the social accountability of managers, and accountability specifically often to shareholders. There's a bigger picture in this, so extending the analysis we see from Fama and Jensen, that shareholders are what we call residual risk takers. Therefore, shareholders are the principals in the principal agent problem where CEOs, senior managers are the agents, and the company should be running their interests. Residual risk takers means they are the risk takers who are paid last. Everyone else gets paid first, whether a company is successful or not. You pay first those people who have mortgages and loans, etc., and debts that are secured. You then pay those with unsecured loans, such as suppliers, or possibly overdrafts, or employees, and then the last people to be paid from either from profits from the leftover when the company has been folded, if there's anything left, are the shareholders. Therefore, by right, they're saying they have a claim on the profits. They have the first claim on the value that is produced. Because as we know, profit is simply a matter of opinion. But on the value the firm generates, the final claim on that is by the shareholders. But there's an obvious tension here if you have one person making the decision and another person bearing the risk. Why not take a high-risk decision? You may think, oh, my profits will be great if I take the risks, But in fact, you may as well go for that if you're the person who's taking the risk and can gain extra money because of it. Because there is no loss for you. You do not take the loss. It's the company that takes the loss. It's not you that has lost all the money. And therefore, in ways that we end up doing is there becomes this inherent tension between these two groups. We call this moral hazard, where one person is taking the risk on behalf of another person and gains on the upside but does not lose on the downside. So what we're actually saying here is a principal hires an agent to do their work. Someone to slot into their place in the M form. Let's have a look at the video on Chandler if you want to know more about the M form. But the information you have to say about the person you're hiring is never going to be complete. You can just choose very much of the stuff you need, some form of corporate governance or some technique that will allow you to align your interests between agent and principal. Various techniques have been proposed to do this. And so what are the mechanisms that have been proposed for us to align the interests of that? Some areas include piece rates or commissions. Pay is dependent on the amount of work you do and the amount that you produce. Other things that we talk about are potential profit sharing. As we said, we have this idea where the company generates excess value, and we talk about the value that is being produced, and therefore you decide to give 20% of the value, 20% of the extra value, 20% of what we call profits in the terms of accountancy things, to the manager, for example. Therefore, we're saying it's in their interest to boost profits efficiently, but of course, they're only boosting profits. They're only boosting the accounting value of profits. We don't necessarily know what they're doing to the share, the actual value generation of the company. We don't necessarily know if that reflects on the underlying needs of the profit. And if the company does make losses, there's no downside on that sort of thing. So we can look at other ways. We can have efficiency wages. Efficiency wages are where you're paid to the marginal cost of any increasing wage that you gain is equal to the marginal benefit of your improved productivity to the employer. So if you do economic calculations on the value that's being generated, and if that generation value can be shown to benefit the company, your wages will go up in line with that. We can have a situation where people actually might be paid a bonus, but the bonus is delayed. Instead of your bonus being paid immediately, the bonus might only be paid 2 or 3 years down the line if nothing has gone wrong, if you stayed at the company. If something has gone wrong, if somebody's been shot, and the short-term thing that generates the profits because your bonus has disappeared, the long-term is no longer working. You can lose that bonus so that and this can actually be in the form of a bond. The agent posts a bond. The bond can be just to put money to the company before they're allowed to move into it. A certain agent can actually have to pay, but a certain amount of shares they can get involved, or it could well be a delayed bonus we talked about, could be seen as a bond. Or there's the simple old-fashioned fear of discipline, of being sacked if you don't do your job properly. A primary cause of the agency problem is information. And it's what we talk about asymmetric information. What do we mean by when we talk about asymmetric information? Okay. I'll give you an idea what cause. We have information about a certain situation that needs managed. The information comes in. The principal has that information. The principal uses that information to hire a manager. And the manager comes in and performs their duties and works hard to the thing. And we have this sort of situation in which the principal had the information at first and they had the manager to do their job, but both of these operate in a period of self-interest. And as part of their role, the agent gains control of the information, and the information finally starts to be flowed through the agent, and it becomes asymmetric in favour of the agent. The principal is outside the firm, so they have outside knowledge only. They're no longer inside the firms, they no longer have the knowledge that the agent has, and this can become a severe problem for the principal. How do they really know what's going on inside the firm? Because to a greater or less extent, they're completely reliant on the money that's provided them by the agent, the information that's provided them by the agent. The knowledge that they get is provided by the agent. They don't really know what's going on inside. We will often hear this referred to the fact that the firm becomes a black box principal. The principal knows what's going in, the principal knows what's coming out, the principal does not know what's going on inside. Somebody just finds about their value for their share of the profits, their dividends, and gets these debts from the agent. They rely on the fact that the agent is being honest with them. This has been developed over, though, in recent years. Eisenhardt looked at this and had a good review of agency theory. He tried to update it and bring in the latest economic thinking to try and deal with some of the critiques we gave out earlier. One of the things he said is that agency theory actually links very well to the political and the organisational models and contingency models of organisations. So in organisational theory, for example, the political view of organisations is that it's about the relationships between people. It's about people's personal relationships that can overcome the agency theory, can overcome agency problems through political behaviour within your organisation. You can build culture, you can build allies, you can try and shift culture around, you can make cultural changes, cultural difference and cultural shifts in an organisation. But also there's the contingency model, the contingency approach. This says that organisations, far from having an overall plan, far from being set up to operate in a simple, rational manner, so that organisations' actions are contingent of certain other behaviours. They're contingent on reactions to change in the environment, to reactions to changes within the organisation. So that's what we call contingency theory, and agency theory claims to link very well to this. Agency thinking has helped in understanding the problem of information asymmetry, has also helped dealing with risk and control. Even if the theory is not true about everybody, the argument put forward is that there may be elements of it that have been useful, that it's helped us massively deal with problems that organisations need to set themselves up and think about the potential of agency behaviour, even if they're actually trying to think that it won't necessarily come forward. And there's a later video lecture on stewardship, which I think is important and helpful there. So what is argued here by Eisenhardt is that the dominance of agency theory is for more than its simplicity, more than for its grounding in neoclassical economics. It is the fact that it actually has helped deal with a series of ongoing problems. It may not be true that everybody behaves like an agent, but there's obviously a case that actually maybe we need to treat everybody like an agent. But again, this has been argued that the treatment of everybody like an agent causes a situation in which people start to behave like an agent. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We have a later video on stewardship theory, suggests there are other possibilities in the way that people could operate and work together, which takes a less negative view of human relations. So, what we can say about agency theory, quite possibly then, working with Eisenhardt, is that agency can be said to pass the useful test. It may be wrong, but it is useful. Maybe. Thanks for listening.